In this video, I'll show you how to blend two images in Affinity. Let's get started. If you'd like to follow along with me, I've left a download link to the photos that I'll be using in the video description. To begin blending two images, go ahead and start with your background image open. So in this case, we have our street image. Once that's in place, we can add our model into the scene. So I'll go to the top of the screen to File, and then down to Place. Then I'll just add our swimmer into the scene. I'll click and drag to add this in. And then, to make it a little easier to place it, I'll lower the opacity of the swimmer's layer so that I can see both of our images at the same time. Now, one thing that makes these two images really good to combine is that they're taken from a very similar angle. You can see that we can line the horizons up, and this will make it even easier to make this look convincing. So go ahead and line up the horizon. And as one other tip for placing this, make sure that your swimmer image stretches to the very edges. That way the water doesn't get cut off at a strange point. So I'm just going to increase the size here and increase the size here. And I think I like this placement with the swimmer lined up nicely with the middle of the street right here. So with that placed nicely, I'm just going to raise the opacity. And now we can cut out the swimmer from their layer. To do this, I'm going to grab the Selection Brush tool. You can click on the little arrow of the Object Selection tool to find the selection brush. Then you can go ahead and paint over the model to make a selection. If you need to change your brush size, you can use the bracket keys on your keyboard to make your brush bigger or smaller. And if you accidentally select a little too much, you can hold Alt or Option as you click and drag to remove from your selection. At this point, I think this is a pretty good selection. We have her head and shoulders selected nicely, and it's okay if you select a little bit of the water here. We're going to add more water in anyway. So with that selection made, I'm going to go to the context toolbar to refine it. Usually I would paint over the edges of the hair to make sure it's a nice selection. In this case, her hair is slicked back, so there's no need to paint. I'll just press Apply. And then I'm going to add a mask to remove the background. Then I'll press Command or Control D to deselect. So now that that's done, I want to add some of the water back in. So with the mask layer selected, I'm just going to grab the paintbrush tool, and I'll make sure I'm painting with 100% flow and 0% hardness. Then over here, I'll select white paint, and I'll make sure it's 100% white. And now I'll just click and drag to paint in more of this water. So this is what it looks like to paint with 100% flow. We have a nice soft edge here, but it does cut off a little bit harshly, and I want to blend the water into the street better. So after doing this initial painting, I'm going to adjust my paintbrush. I'll click and drag on this to lower the flow to around 10%. And then I'll just click and drag to softly apply more of this paint on the edges of the water. You can see this looks a lot more subtle. This looks pretty good so far, but there is an obvious problem: the color of the water. I want the water to blend into the street to create an illusion effect, so I need to get rid of this beautiful blue color. To do this, I'll go to our adjustments, and I'll apply an HSL adjustment. I only want this to affect the swimmer layer, so I'll click and drag on this layer and place it on top of the swimmer layer to make it a child layer. Then, to remove the blue color, I'll start in the cyan color channel, and I'll lower the saturation all the way. You can see that this has removed most of the blue color. I'll also go to the blue color channel, and I'll lower the saturation all the way to make sure all of the blue is fully removed. I'll close out of this, and now I'll turn this layer off so that you can see the before and after of removing the color. This blends in so well. Okay, at this point, you could stop here. I think this already looks pretty good, but I do want to add a few finishing touches to make this even more realistic. The main thing that I want to fix is the lighting. Right now, you can see that the swimmer has pretty harsh lighting. On the left side of her face, she has very bright light, and on the right side, you can see it's very dark in shadow. We can use this as a reference and copy it for the background. Before we copy this exact lighting, I want you to think about the light source. If the left side of her face is lit up, that would mean that the sun is up in this direction. So it's shining light down onto her face. And for the background, it would mean that it would shine light over here onto this part of the mountain. But this part would be in shadow. So let's go ahead and do that for the background. To do this, I'm going to go to our adjustments, and I'll apply a curves adjustment. We only want this to affect the background, so I'm going to click and drag on this layer to place it as a child layer to the background. Let's start by adding more shadow. I'll click and drag on this line to make it darker. I'll close out of this. And now, to only apply it to this area, I'm going to invert this layer with Command or Control I. You can see we have a mask applied that's fully covering up this curves adjustment. To reveal it again, I'll grab the paintbrush, and I'll paint in white paint wherever I want the darkness to be added. And I'm still painting with a pretty low flow here, just to make sure everything blends in nicely. So now you can see the before and after of making that area darker. To mimic the brighter lighting on this side, I want to show you a fun trick to add a ball of light. To do this, go over to the Shape Tools and click on the little arrow to select the Ellipse tool. Then go ahead and click and drag to create a circle. And then, to add some nice colors to this, I'm going to use the Gradient tool. I'll click from the very center to the outer edge, and I want this to be white in the center and a nice golden color on the outside. So with this gray color stop selected, I'll make this a golden color. And then I'm going to adjust the settings of this gradient to change it from a linear gradient to a radial gradient. So now that we've built out this ball of light, I want to make this look fuzzier on the edges. So I'm going to go over here to our filters, and I'm going to apply a Gaussian blur. This has been applied as a child layer to this ball, which is perfect. I'm just going to increase the radius to make this nice and soft. This slider only goes up to 100, but you can actually type in any number you want and then press Enter to make it even more blurry. I think this ball of light already looks pretty good, but we can adjust it even more. I'm going to select the entire layer for this ball of light, and then I'm going to change the blend mode. If you change the blend mode to screen, this ball of light will brighten anything it touches. I'm just going to grab the Move tool so that I can adjust the size and position of this. I mostly want the mountain to be brighter, so I think this looks pretty good. I don't want it to affect the street too much, because you can see the water stays this dark gray, and the street becomes brighter. I don't think that blends very well, so I'll raise this up so that only this area is brighter. Then I can lower the opacity a little to make this a little more subtle. And with that, I think the lighting in the background already looks a lot better. But I have one more layer I want to add. The swimmer's layer still looks like it has a much more harsh lighting with this bright sun and the dark shadow. So I'm going to make the lighting in the background more intense by adding a curves adjustment. To make lighting more intense, you can always add an S curve, which means you brighten the highlights and darken the shadows to create this S shape. You can see this has made the lighting much more harsh. Here's the before and after. I don't want the entire picture to get more harsh. You can see on the road, this is making this blend not as well. So I'm going to invert this layer with Command or Control I. And then once again, I'm going to paint in white paint. Just make sure to reset your colors. There you go. And now I'll paint this over the mountains. With that finished, I'll hold Shift to select all of these lighting layers, and I'll turn them off so you can see the before, and here's the after. Okay, we're almost done. I just have a few last steps that will be really quick and make a great impact. First, I want to blur the background to make the swimmer stand out more. To blur the background, I'll go to our filters, and I'll apply a Gaussian blur. This has been placed as a child layer to the background, which is perfect. I'll just raise the radius, and I'll make sure to turn on Preserve Alpha so that the edges don't become transparent. I think this amount of blurring looks pretty good in the background, but I don't like how it looks in the foreground right here. If our model is in focus, then this whole area should also be in focus, and then it should gradually blur toward the back. To mimic this effect, we can use the gradient tool, and I'll just click starting from back here, and I'll end where our model is. Wherever the gradient is white, the blur will be fully visible, and wherever it's black, it will be invisible. So everything in between from these 2 points is gradually blending that together. And you can see what this looks like. Here's the before and after of applying that blur. Next, I want to add some warmth to the overall colors of this image. So I'm going to select the top swimmer layer so that our next layer goes on top of everything. For our next layer, I'll go to the adjustments, and I'll apply a color balance layer. Since it's on top of everything, it will affect the swimmer layer and the background layer at the same time. Let's start by changing this to shadows so that we can adjust the colors in the shadows. I'm going to move this slider to add a little bit more cyan to the shadows, And I'll raise this slider to add more blue. So the shadows look a little more cool toned. And now I'm just going to change this to the midtones. And I want to add a bit more warmth. So I'll raise the red slider. And I'll lower this slider to add yellow. And last, we can go to the highlights and add a little more warmth here. But I do find the highlights are pretty sensitive. You can see the sky really changes. So I'm just going to add a little bit of red and a little bit of yellow. And with that, I think these colors look really nice. Here's the before and the after. Okay, to finish, here's my secret trick for composites. I always like to add a little bit of noise at the end. This really helps if one of your photos is blurrier than the other. By adding just a little bit of texture over the top, it really helps to make everything look like it's the same photo. To add this noise, go to the filters, and then add the Add Noise filter. Make sure it's on top of everything, and then you can increase the intensity. You can see by raising this just a little bit, we have a similar noise on her face and the road. It already makes things look more even. So I'll just raise this a little. And now with all of that done, we can go ahead and see the before and after of this composite. I think this turned out so good. Now you know how to blend two images to create an illusion effect. Great job! And if you enjoyed this video, I'll leave a link in the video description to my free Affinity course. In the course, you'll learn 10 simple steps to make any photo amazing. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next Affinity Revolution tutorial.